I'd like to take a few minutes to show you how you can use Micro Focus File Reporter and Micro Focus Change Guardian to determine who is and who is not using the files on your file system. Determining who is not using the access that they have been provided to certain files is important because you don't want users with excess access to the file system. That could be a security or a policy violation. It could also introduce risk if their account were ever compromised via a hacker or with malware. By limiting access to only those people that actually truly need access, you can make your file system secure. File Reporter is an excellent solution in terms of providing you reports on who has access and how they gained that access. It can report on individual users' access. It can report on users who are members of a group that have access, or users who have inherited access to that file system. Change Guardian, on the other hand, can tell you who is using the file system. It doesn't know how they got access to that file system. It just simply knows that they are using that access. To determine who's not using the access that they have been provisioned with, it's simply a matter of taking the reports from File Reporter, listing everyone who has access, and from that removing all of those users who are using the file system. What you are left with are users who, even though they have permissions to the file system, are in fact not using it. So we're going to start our analysis in File Reporter. We're going to click on the Reports tab, and I'm going to do a filter here because I already have a report defined for our Finance folder. We're going to look at the Finance folder permissions. When the report loads, as you can see from the parameters page of the report, I am reporting on all of the Finance paths. Under Report Data, I can see all the users and groups who have access to the Finance data. I can see if users have direct access or indirect access because they are members of groups, and I can also see if that access is inherited from further up the directory tree. Now that I know everyone who has access, I want to be able to export this data. I could export it from here. However, this report, even in CSV format, will contain all of the header information, including the parameters and the legend. This video is not meant to be a tutorial on File Reporter itself, but here I have another report that is exactly the same report, but what I've done is I've checked off the box that says Unformatted Report, and this will give me the raw data that I can then export in a proper CSV format. As you can see, this looks much more like CSV formatted data. Now all I need to do is export it. Now that we have the File Reporter data, let's switch over to Change Guardian. This is the Change Guardian dashboard, and as you can see, we have a number of users who've been quite active. What I need, however, is the raw data from Change Guardian. From the Change Guardian console, I can set the appropriate filters, timeline, as well as put a filter in place for the Finance data directory. Now I'm only looking at events from that specific directory structure. We're going to go ahead and export the data from here in a CSV format so that we can manipulate it as well in comparison to the File Reporter data. When Change Guardian exports the data, it actually zips it up. So we're going to have to do one more step, and that is to unzip that file first before we can manipulate it. As you may recall earlier, I stated that it's simply math in terms of figuring out who is not using their access. We know from File Reporter who has rights. We know from Change Guardian who is using their rights. And by comparing these two, we can figure out who's not using the rights that they have. The best place to do that kind of math is Excel. Here I have a spreadsheet that I've built with a couple of macros built in that will load up the results from my File Reporter export and my Change Guardian export and compare those two to figure out who's not using their access. As you can see here, the spreadsheet is currently blank. The other tabs contain no data. I will now load the File Reporter CSV file into the File Reporter Data tab. And I'll do the same thing for the Change Guardian data, being sure to select the unzipped CSV file. Before I click Analyze, I just want to show you very quickly from the File Reporter data, we're going to be looking at column B, which is the user information. And then from the Change Guardian data, we're going to be looking at column AN, which again is the user information. We'll be comparing these two columns together to see which users have access versus how much access they're using. Okay, let's hit analyze and see what we get. If we take out all of the system IDs and group IDs, since groups won't actually log in to access files, some things become very evident. First of all, we can see that there are some very heavy users of this data. We probably want to make sure that they are the primary owners, or their role is the primary owner of this data. Then we can also see the users that have no activity on this data. These users have access but have not used that access for some reason. We probably want to question as to why they have access in the first place and make sure that that is appropriate. I would just like to remind you that this spreadsheet is something that I've built. It is not a product. It is just something to illustrate the fact that we have both sets of data, and by comparing those two, we can determine who is and who is not using the files. As you've hopefully seen, File Reporter and Change Guardian can help you secure your file system. File Reporter can tell you everyone who has access and how they got access to your file system, and you can remove those names off that list that are not appropriate, but there may still be people who have access but are not using it, and Change Guardian can help you determine those users. With the powerful combination of these two products, you can ensure that only the people that truly use and need access to the file system, in fact, do have access. Thank you very much for your time today and for your interest in File Reporter and Change Guardian.